Welcome, dear listeners. You're listening to the Digikompetenz podcast with Anne Cork and Philip Ramin.
Yes, and today we're speaking to Professor Dr. Joseph Fuller, Professor of Management Practice and co-head of Managing the Future of Work project at Harvard Business School. Both of Joe's parents were Harvard professors, so you could say he's in the family business. And if you think that means that he might not actually be in touch with everyday life, then you'd be totally wrong, because Joe's wife is the mayor of the city he lives in. So Joe has to do all the grocery shopping because she gets stopped every minute when she goes shopping. So welcome to our podcast, Joe. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, Anne and Philip, I'm delighted to be here.
So, Joe, I've been wondering how to get up grocery shopping myself for quite a long time now. So I'm going to have to look into becoming mayor, I think. Is that the way to do it?
Well, it's a fast track. But I emphasize getting through the store as fast as possible. So I'm now know exactly where the items we want to buy are, and you'll be surprised how quick I can be behind one of those carts.
You're an absolute expert, skilled shopper, skilled at pointing out things at a very, very short notice. Is that a skill that you think people need for the future?
Well, I think that as Malcolm Gladwell has taught us, that the repetition leads to expertise. So I haven't done it 10,000 times yet, but it's closing in on that number. So people benefit from having routines and get more efficient at things over time, and whether that's in their personal lives or in their work lives.
So you've got Harvard, you've got in your blood, you could say, with both parents having been there before. Did they teach the same subject?
Actually, they taught related topics. My father's original specialty was labor relations, but he also taught organizational behavior, we would now call it. That was my mother's field. And they met here shortly after World War II. And then happily for our family, in the early 1970s, my father was offered the position as the head of human resources for General Motors Corporation. That had been his big consulting client, and they chose to hire him into that job. So he got to actually go and do things that he preached about for many years, which is not something that happens to many professors.
That's right. Not a lot of them get back into industry, but you seem to have your fingers right in industry, or looking at everything very, very closely. Is there something that you learned at home growing up that you think is a key skill today?
Well, I think a sentence that my mother once uttered comes back to me very frequently, which is that she said in all settings, but certainly in a business setting, if someone says something that makes no sense to you, you should reflect on why it makes sense to them. And
what a relief, Joe, just to interrupt you shortly. What a relief that you've said that in this podcast. You've taken the pressure off.
Well, you have to reciprocate in that reaction if I say something you don't understand. But that kind of thinking has served me well. One of the courses I teach here is about being a general management. I was a CEO for 30 years, and I certainly found that there's a very real tendency on decision makers' part to suffer from something called the principal attribution error. And the principal attribution error is that if someone who you know to be intelligent and should be motivated in the same way you are, if they disagree with you, that they have the attribution one tends to make is they have some kind of other motive. It's politics, it's personal. They're trying to get advanced faster, or there's some hidden motive they have that they're holding back from you. And the vast majority of disagreements are based on different data, people having different pools of data they're drawing on, and drawing attributions as to what that data means. And so the discipline of being able to inquire, actively listen, illustrate when you make a comment, so that you're not just saying, "Oh well," and you feel, I know you feel this way. That's a terrible way to engage someone. And let me ask you how you're thinking about this, because when you asked me that question, I found it a bit confusing. Tell me more. Now I can actually, I've invited Anne to communicate with me. So it was a lesson. My parents are long gone, but I think of them often when I'm in managerial situations.
Sounds very much like data literacy too.
Absolutely. And Joe, what you're describing sounds quite straightforward, quite down to earth, actually. Why do so many managers have such a hard time to follow these kinds of principles in practice?
Well, there are a couple of things. We're all humans, and as Kahneman and Tversky taught us, the vast majority of decisions we make are based on rapid fire inferences, that we all develop heuristics that we use to explain the world. And that particularly if you're in a managerial situation where you've gone to hundreds and hundreds of meetings, made hundreds of thousands of decisions, you can get a bit lazy in your thinking. And I think the two other malign forces here are, everyone is always in a terrible rush to get to the next thing, get to the next thing, get to the next thing. That leads to indiscipline, that leads to error. Similarly, if you want to understand how most organizations work, you really have to think about the incentives, not just what I've been told would cause me to get a nice bonus or get a raise or promotion, but in most organizations, it's also the softer kind of social incentives or penalties. In many large companies, executives are much more fearful of being marginalized and not being on the inside of things than they are being terminated. They're worried about embarrassing themselves by some kind of mistake or faux pas, which will cause them to be disrespected. They're more scared of that than they are getting only 50% of their target bonus for this year. And so business processes and teams and businesses, companies are made up of highly imperfect, error-prone assets. I'm not talking about machine tools. I'm not talking about dynamos. I'm talking about people, and that have to factor in any executive's equation. That people are not they're not machine tools. They're not dynamos. They're the era of Turner type command and control thinking and management should be well behind us now, and that leaves managers with the choice of honing those so-called soft skills or social skills that enable them to develop better appreciation for how to motivate people and to guide them to be more productive and happier in their work lives.
Does that mean that the managers also have to learn to show their own imperfection?
Yes, and there's no stronger sentence, particularly for a senior executive, than "I think I was wrong about that," or "I'm glad you corrected me on that." This is also a very cultural thing. So I've just been completing some research on how the job specifications for C-suite executives, including CEOs, have changed over the last 20 years. And what it shows is that there's been a remarkable growth in the emphasis boards of directors and sitting executives seeking successors or add people to their teams place on so-called social skills, having a theory of the mind, being a very effective communicator with range who can communicate to different types of constituencies. And those requirements, those preferences in the job specifications are crowding out operating skills, administrative skills. It's not crowding them completely out. So if, for example, hiring for CFOs, chief financial officers, still can emphasize as having technical and administrative skills. But for CEOs and other C-suite executives, social skills have gained significant market share at the expense of operating experience. That's particularly true in the United States. It's much less true in Asia, where Asian management systems are much more similar to the United States management system of 30, 40 years ago.
Right. So more hierarchical, more traditional.
Yes. And more emphasis placed on your engineering skill or your financial skill, whatever the core activities are of the business.
How well are universities, schools prepared for this shift in education?
Not at all.
It was quite.
First of all, social skills are developed fairly early in one's life. So, and if you look at the curriculum and in schools for younger children, lyceum, whatever your level you're talking about, we do not teach literature with any emphasis on developing the social capabilities of the pupils. We teach them grammar and spelling and syntax and how to appreciate the written word. We don't teach chemistry to teach teamwork. We don't teach mathematics to emphasize collaborative problem solving. So one of the several great challenges facing us in skills development over time will be as more and more routine tasks are automated, what's left? What's left are the human capabilities and human skills, specifically interacting with other humans, that technology finds it very difficult to deal with, because technology likes stability and predictability and correlation. Technology isn't very good at causation, and it's not very good at dealing with other assets, in this case, human assets, that behave in peculiar ways. So only humans can help manage other humans and help other humans be more effective. So the premium on social skills is going to continue to grow. And in when I sometimes speak to large groups of educators in the United States, one of the things I emphasize with them is we need to be thinking about how we do what would be called lesson planning in the United States, introducing some of those skills. If you're teaching biology and it's the experience we all had in high school of dissecting the frog, and you're going to have a team do it, assign a team of people of students that you've never seen the four of them together in the lunchroom before school, chatting before class. If you're teaching English, think of it as teaching communications, and cause the students to have to spontaneously describe something verbally once a week, every week. Cause them to have to write a short form piece of writing. It could be interpretation of some literature or something else every week, so that they get used to the notion of, I have to be able to articulate something about some data or situation I know about comfortably. You're giving them practice in discussing something with their supervisor or writing a critical email that'll be relevant 20 years from now. But if as a 8-year-old, you're having to write 5 sentences every day or 2 or 3 times a week, it becomes easy and habitual. If you're only starting to have to do that when you're 22 years old, or in a system like Germany's as a young professional, if you're coming up through the apprenticeship track, it's far harder to cultivate ease and efficiency in doing those things when you started as a young adult.
So are companies doing a good job of actually measuring social skills? Are they using KPIs in C-level management or any kind of secret formula that you can let us know about to take to Germany today?
Well, and if it's a secret, I could not only not tell you, and if I did tell you, I'd have to kill you. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to seem like an awfully depressive personality to your listeners, but no, companies are terrible at that. Companies infer that someone who has a certain type of track record, specifically a certain type of academic background, brings these social skills. And we know that. Very excited by some research we just published last month, which for the first time demonstrates that. And the way we showed it is that there is a trend in the United States to strip out university degree requirements so that the applicant for a job must hold a university degree. For about 15 years, more and more jobs had what we call degree inflation. Suddenly jobs that had never required a college degree suddenly required them. There's some reversal of that in an appreciable number of jobs. But when an employer strips out that requirement, what shows up in the new job description? Very significant description of social skills requirements that weren't there before. So that we can see that when the employer made a conscious decision, well, let's not require a university degree, but what does that mean we have to add to the specification? Social skills dominated. So having taken a very negative stance to two of your questions, let me introduce some hope here. We are learning a tremendous amount about cognitive psychology, and there are more and more young companies, entrepreneurial companies, developing various approaches, relying on technology, whether it's simulation technology or gamified decision making, that allow one to evaluate a candidate on things like their decisiveness, their propensity to take risk, and very importantly, some of them provide the employee an opportunity to experience something of what the job would actually be like. One of the things that plagues the labor market, certainly in the United States, is what we call mismatches. That a learner who's anticipating making the transition from education to employment has a hypothesis about what they might like to do, or graduates, need to stay and make money, and applies for a job that's available locally, really not knowing much about it. Then they get into the position and they're either no good at it, and it's miserable to be in a job that you know you're no good at, or they just dislike it. So, for example, there's a exciting company in Israel called Skillset, which creates simulations for fairly ordinary jobs, customer service rep, warehouseman, where you are using virtual reality. You have 4 or 5 5-minute episodes of what it's like to have that job. The prospective employee gets to basically test it and see if this is what a day in the life of a customer service rep is like. And one of the simulations would be a very angry customer who's not being polite and doesn't understand how to, for example, reference their account data. And that's fine. You weren't upset by it. It didn't make you scared or anxious to hang up. Now I know that even in a bad episode in a day, this is okay. Also, the employer can see how I perform on those simulations, and they may see that Anne does brilliantly on the hardest ones, which is co-indicated based on their data with someone who's going to be a success in the role, maybe have a high likelihood of being promoted to supervisory capacity. And I did badly on the hardest simulations. That's co-indicated that I'm not going to be very successful here, that I'm going to likely leave the position fairly quickly, and maybe I'm not the right person to hire.
But talking about data, the problem I see a bit is that many companies do not really have a clue about, what kinds of skills we have in our company.
Yes.
They do not really measure it. They do not really manage it properly. That's
right.
At least what I can see. So, what would we recommend at this point? I mean, is it a matter of data science? Is it a matter of putting emphasis on the topic, or what about the HR function? Actually, by the way, I mean, that should be their task, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you said, Philip, on several fronts. First of all, with the growth of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence getting stronger on areas like causation, so-called cognitive artificial intelligence, we can begin to develop tools where we know, by linking our personnel files with our performance management system data, what the skills are in the company, what the skills deficits are in the company relative to our strategic intentions. We'll be able also to understand which supervisors seem to have a great track record of having their subordinates get promoted.
Mm-hmm.
If you go into what I call most of the business intelligence systems, the BI systems in companies, they'll be able to tell you with incredible accuracy how much inventory we have in that warehouse, or how much finished goods we are open to promise, is the phrase, to deliver to customers. But they will not tell you which supervisors have the most voluntary turnover, the most people that quit their jobs versus those that have leaved, and explain it. It could be that the person who has no turnover is essentially not managing anybody and spending his time playing solitaire on his laptop and not paying attention, and doesn't have good operating performance. Or it could be that they are hugely attentive to their subordinates and make work very pleasant and build a great team. And if I know what the data is, at least I can ask the right questions about it. HR has been a function that has been very procedural, very compliance oriented, but as the source of differentiation for a lot of companies becomes more and more reliant on their talent, I think HR becomes increasingly strategic and increasingly central to a company's ability to fulfill its strategic objectives. Is HR prepared for that? In some instances, yes. But HR executives have long complained that they don't have a seat at the table, that they're not at the top table to discuss the strategic direction of the company, and the operating managers and the P&L managers just drop things in their lap. Time to stop complaining about that and start earning your seat at the table.
Absolutely.
Joe, when you're talking about all these different people coming with different requirements, and HR having to earn a seat at the table, does HR need to take a seat at the front in ensuring that people's skills are kept up to date? Because if people are coming in without degrees, does that mean that they need to keep educating the people in a different way to before? And has that accelerated the need for learning?
Absolutely. And what's happened now pretty much across the board is that the pace of change and technology is such that the formal education system can't keep up with it. Think of the formal education system as a great big turning gear, 10 feet in diameter, that rotates once an hour. Well, technology and the rate technology changes, this flywheel like you'd have in your wristwatch that's going around at so fast you can barely count how fast it rotates, how many times it rotates in a minute. So we've got to stop pretending that by spending more money and by expressing unhappiness with the performance of the formal education system, that somehow that's going to be reversed. More and more companies are going to have ought to be seeking candidates who are numerate, literate, have good social skills, have interpersonal skills, and obviously a desire to work and work hard to accomplish something, but that they are going to be responsible for providing the very practical and specific training and the very practical and specific retraining to workers. And there's going to be a big incentive to do that in the form of demographics, where if in certainly across most of the EU countries, you have will anticipate negative working age population growth. So the workforce would be actually shrinking, and that can be partially addressed by immigration. We've seen in Europe, it's been largely addressed industrial companies by relocation. So companies moving, for example, from the Ruhr to Slovakia or Poland or something like that. But even those countries have long-term demographic problems, and particularly countries that do not have an ease of absorbing immigrants. The United States has almost an incalculable number of God-given advantages. We have coastlines, for example, that are highly amenable to ocean transport. If you go to Brazil, every coastline is basically a cliff. Unlike Africa, we have a huge system of navigable riverways. We have another unfair advantage, which is the United States has a multi-century history of ingesting large, spicy meals of immigrants successfully. But unless you have something like immigration crutch, as a country, you're going to have fewer workers employed as in relative the number of children and retirees you have, which means the getting an employee, particularly a skilled employee, is going to get harder and harder. So you're going to be much better to grow your own talent in choosing to invest in growing somebody based on their personnel file and their performance than you're going to the spot market for labor and fighting over talent with everybody else who needs the exact same person. So the premium on being a good skills teacher as a company and a very dedicated and forward-looking reskiller of your talent, anticipating what types of technical needs your strategy is going to require 1, 2, 3 years from now, not 1, 2, 3 weeks from now. Companies that get good on that will reap a very considerable advantage in the marketplace.
Talking about this continuous learning, this further education idea, I mean, the World Economic Forum has forecasted that around 50% of all workers worldwide need to be upskilled or reskilled in the next 5 years. Here in Germany, we do have the problem that, first of all, companies spend on average 2 days per year on further education, their MBAs. And second, a lot of blue-collar workers don't have access at all to these kinds of education possibilities, because sometimes they do not have their own email address. So therefore, they can also not access any kinds of e-learnings and stuff like that. How does it look like in the US, first of all? And second, what's your recommendation in this direction? How can we really make it happen, this further education and continuous learning idea, which used to be such a big buzzword over the last year?
Yeah. Well, it is clear that formal training in companies really for the last 30 years has been not just being gradually reduced, often for economic reasons, but also becoming more about compliance. So some of those hours in those 2 days will be, here's our training on corruption and or on harassment or on diversity training, things like that. And those are all perfectly appropriate things. It's not something that anyone should be anything other than enthusiastic that companies are doing. But the most training and learning actually takes place as part of your work, as opposed to going to a classroom. It means that job design has got to accommodate the introduction of new technology. It means that you have to have supervisors who have been taught how to teach. or you need to have some new types of supervisory or supporting personnel who are augmenting the current organization structure to bring that type of discipline. This is also an area, of course, where there's a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship and innovation and new solutions. Mm-hmm. So we can see this. Examples would be in lots of maintenance and repair personnel. Now they go to work with a tablet that has a searchable, highly digitalized, video supported capability at how I repair this air conditioning system or this refrigeration system or this electrical control system. We do all have to understand, though, that a lot of people never liked school to begin with. And when you say to them, well, we're going to send you to training at the local technical college or at the university, their reaction is, I don't want to do that. They're nervous. So we have to, in the United States, what are we seeing? We're seeing that companies like Walmart and Amazon, who 10 years ago were being constantly criticized for what people portrayed as poor workforce practices, have completely changed, are investing much more heavily in training and upskilling. And in Amazon's case, Disney is also an example of this, in investing in the skills of their workers in anticipation that those workers will leave their employment, but be better positioned to go into the workforce and get a better paying job than they have at Disney or Amazon. That's a completely different philosophy than they would have had 10 years ago. And they're doing that both because they've been criticized and they've reflected on their brand positioning and what political leaders and social leaders have been saying about them in the past. But they're also understanding that making those investments, having them visible to the current workforce, motivates that workforce, causes them to want to seek advancement in the company, makes them better customers if they do leave. So if they're got in the pub or going to a youth athletic event, they're talking to other parents there. They say, well, someone says something questionable about Amazon or questionable about Walmart, this person will say, well, I used to work there and they treated me very well. So in this era of social media, that's quite important. We do have, though, the so-called digital divide. We have it in the United States. We have it really worldwide. It is lower wage workers not only don't have the money often to pay to augment their skills and therefore increase their job prospects. They and my research shows very clearly, they don't have the money. They're very nervous. They don't know what kind of skill to go get. And they often don't have the time. And some people hear that says, oh, they probably want to watch football, or, oh, they're playing video games. If you don't have much money, you do your own caregiving. You go to the store and shop for your elderly parents. You have to check in on them. You don't have the money to pay for a babysitter or a nanny. You're taking care of your kids after school. And the notion that, well, after work, then when I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old and a mother with some health problems all living with me, I'm going to go off to the technical college 4 nights a week for 90 minutes of training every night. It's a novel. It's a fantasy. It's not going to actually happen.
What about SMEs? When you're talking about the big companies, or the small and middle-sized companies, are there any signs of collective training that people see overarching from one company to another to invest in an outside company to train? Because they say, well, it doesn't matter if they get promoted, if they leave the company, they're coming to me anyway.
It's rare, but it's a very important idea. Now, it does in the countries like across the GSA, so certainly Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Denmark, where you've got pretty strong apprenticeship legacies. That's been a huge boon to, for example, Mittelstand companies. but it tends to be training for a specific role, if not training in soft skills. Upward mobility through apprenticeship programs is a problem. We all talk about, well, in the Swiss system, people can move from the more apprenticeship track into the university track or back and forth. Yes, you can, but it's not that common.
Yeah.
Many of the apprenticeship systems introduce people into careers where if they do very, very well, they might be promoted 3 times over the course of their career, or 2 times. It's not, enter the old story about someone comes in as the mail delivery clerk and ends up running the business. That doesn't happen in real life, but it also does not happen in apprenticeship systems where you basically slotted into a career early and you can only go as far as that career takes you. So in the future, I think we're going to see more political players, political executives trying to incent training on a regional basis, which would benefit all employers in the region. You can see some employers that are now very cognizant of providing training or training resources for their smaller suppliers to keep their supply base healthy. And this will become the object of considerable entrepreneurial investment. If we just see what's already happened in the United States in terms of things like coding academies, that logic can be extended into multiple areas of learning and skills development. We're also seeing some exciting developments in the United States, like so-called income sharing agreements, so that, yes, someone will finance my learning, and then I will repay them almost like a loan once I'm earning more to go forward. This is a mechanism for filling a very important gap in the way learning is financed in the United States, which is heavily dependent on the government and very much oriented toward traditional educators. So just for an example, to take a student loan from the US government, you must be studying at what's called an accredited institution. The course you're taking must have more than 100 hours of content. And all these rules and regulations that are directly derived from the fact it was set up as a system to finance people going to university, and is very inflexible and doesn't accommodate people going to a coding academy or people going to get technical or professional training.
Joe, let's talk a bit more about skill-based hiring and your findings on the future of degrees. Maybe fun fact, several years ago, I was writing my PhD based on the findings of Harvard business professor Clayton Christensen on disruptive innovation. So taking disruptive innovation to account, is this idea or also your findings kind of disrupting the relevance, the meaning of leading universities? Because maybe this, big brands are becoming less important in the future because it's more about what you actually can do or cannot do?
Well, Philip, remember, Harvard is in my blood, so this is very personal for me. My parents went to Harvard and taught at Harvard. I went to Harvard. My brother went to Harvard. My 3 sons all went to Harvard. So this is family business for me.
I see. Sorry for that.
I think the one has to distinguish between the elite universities, whether they're elite general universities like Harvard or elite, unique technical universities like a Tsinghua or an MIT, or most people would portray Cambridge University as the more technical of the 2 famous English universities, Oxford and Cambridge, and they have, I think Clayton, who was my friend for 30 years, would say they have the longest lease on life. There will be elite research universities, but that the less selective universities will be under pretty severe pressure. we'll have an experiment that shortly in the United States, because there was a rapid decline in the birth rate related to the Great Recession. So we're 2 or 3 years away from seeing, when you have a 15% decline in the catchment pool of potential applicants, what happens. And industries have what are called supply curves, and that's usually looked at in things like chemicals, where you can see which plant, which factory, which country has a high cost position, and when there's a cycle, the tail end of the supply curve is put under severe pressure or just shuts down. It's going to be the same thing in capacity in universities for 3 reasons: demographics, which I mentioned. Also, the online university industry in the United States is quite dynamic. Mm-hmm. And this is 2nd and 3rd generation. This is not the type of scandal that the Obama administration focused on stomping out. These are institutions like Arizona State University Online, Western Governors University, where, full disclosure, I'm a trustee, Southern New Hampshire University, that make college more affordable and accessible to students. I think, however, for the vast majority of schools, they are going to have to think in redenominate how they define success. Mm-hmm. Success is having graduates of their university who are moving on to positions of economic security for themselves and eventually for their families. And that economic security is bred in part of what they learned in university, and also how much university cost them. Mm-hmm. Because in the United States, of course, you can have someone who's graduating from university with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of debt financed by the federal government, which cannot be escaped through personal bankruptcy, which has, for quirky reasons, rather high interest rate attached to it. And unless that student is very, very disciplined, that compounds, and suddenly they have a big overhang of debt, which is inhibiting their ability to live a full and productive life. So, universities are still designed to create scholars, and that's the way courses are designed. That's the way fields of study are designed, and it will have to change. There are some very, very exciting examples, however, in the United States of universities making that change. Right here in Boston, a real gem of the U.S. higher ed system is Northeastern University, which has over a 50-year period become hugely higher profile and gained national reputation, because cooperative work, co-op work with employers is integral to their degree programs. So if you're studying engineering there, part of your degree completion is going out and working with an engineering company who's a partner of Northeastern University. You're going to see that model take off. You're going to see companies and universities and colleges adding online courses that are more career and technically oriented. Good illustration of that is Google, which has done a magnificent job creating content based on their internal practices, like mm-hmm. project management, mm-hmm. Like data analytics, into curriculum which they give to colleges and universities in the United States. Mm-hmm. That there are a number of universities and university systems that are making that accessible through their curriculum now for course credit. So the wheels are beginning to turn. Right. But when they turn out the light at in the last traditional university on the planet, it'll be in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I won't be here to see it, but we'll survive.
We'll keep watching that light keeps burning.
I hope so.
All right.
I've just got one more question before you lead off. Do you think that the fact that a lot of universities are going online in a big way, and the business schools going online in a big way, that's going to change the systems internationally as such, because you can no longer be regional, or do you think that there's a big plus to still having a regional feel about universities?
I'm going to say both. I think one of the ways that the economics of universities are sustained, particularly those that enjoy high reputations and have scholars in the fields that there's global demand for their content, will go forward, improve their economics, be more accessible to learners, and be one of the ways we support lifelong learning, but just one. But by the same token, learning is, just as his work, is a social experience. It's as much about anthropology as it is about cognitive ability, the maturation that students or graduate students go through by working in groups, physical contact. While we've learned a tremendous amount about how to do things at distance under the duress of COVID, there are elements of this that cannot be replaced through technology, even if when we get to the world of virtual reality and the metaverse and holograms and whatnot. So I think the universities as repositories of learning and teaching will continue to serve a role. But what's very, very exciting is the extent to which we can augment people's learning, share content development cost, get to best practices. Yeah. There are several courses we've developed just here at the Harvard Business School that are now taught with some remote support by Harvard Business School faculty at other universities. Mm-hmm. Of the second largest course at Yale University, one of the crown jewels of the American university system, if admittedly a bitter rival of Harvard's, the number 2 course at Yale in terms of enrollment is the Harvard course called CS50, which is Introduction to Computer Science, taught by Harvard faculty remotely. Mm-hmm. So when you start seeing transactions between rivals for over 200 years in universities, where both universities are making a judgment as to where they can really deliver world-class content and where they should be sourcing it, that's beginning to be a response to Philip's question about how universities will evolve, and are they going to be subject to so much disruption that they're at risk. The marginal capacity will be at risk, is going to drop off, but the universities can make the types of trade-offs we just talked about, I think will survive both as regional forces and with increasing global presence. Once again here, though, the American system has got a lot of advantages, starting with the fact that American English is the second language of the world for non-English language native speakers. And the technological environment in the United States in these technologies is easily the most dynamic. So we're aided by that. And then finally, we have the great benefit, although occasionally through ineptitude, we put it at risk, which is that when you poll people around the world where they would like to live, if it's not their home country, the United States inevitably is the first choice. So people are attracted to U.S. credentials, and if we had a remotely sensible immigration policy, we would take much greater advantage of that. Currently, we educate thousands of people every year at elite universities and then effectively deport them as fast as we can. We don't literally deport them, but they're not invited to stay, which makes precious little sense to me, at least.
Joe, it's so exciting talking with you, but we are almost at the end of our today's podcast, and I want to ask a last question, basically very straightforward. Which are the 3 highest priority topics for you in the next months or in the next years? What would you say? And you can answer quite short if you want.
First is understand what is driving the poor workforce participation rate in the United States. Mm-hmm. 30 years ago, it was 10 points higher than the EU. Now it's 2 points lower. Workforce participation for prime working age men is at the same level as September 1940. So during the end of the Depression, 41, I'm sorry, September 1941. So we don't understand that, and it badly needs to be understood. Secondly is, how do we go forward in terms of improvements in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the United States? The level and sincerity of companies' commitment to improving on that is unprecedented. It's genuine. It's a challenge we need to rise to. But if we embrace the idea that people have been, large minority populations have been excluded from the opportunities to develop better economic upsides and better economic prospects, if that's happening systemically, we cannot address that simply by hiring more people of color or promoting more women in technical industries. That's a start, but that system manifests itself in something beyond just recruiting. So we have to think about that. Finally, I'm always interested in, how will the fundamental attributes of the deal between employers and employees evolve? Just as an illustration, employers worldwide at the beginning of COVID said, the well-being of our associates is our top priority and is non-negotiable. They didn't say the well-being of our associates is our top priority and non-negotiable as it relates to COVID. So there's been an immediate, a lot of companies are now, they're not wishing they could take that back, but they probably are wishing that they had made it more conditional, because now when a worker is saying, my well-being is you've admitted my well-being is your responsibility, and I'm anxious about coming back to the office. How does that conversation end? As the employer, is it fair for me to say, your anxiety is not my problem? Your job is here, you're fired? Or is it the right of the employee to say, I have some non-specific description of what satisfy me as to my well-being, and the employer is obliged to live with that. So the future of work is very uncertain in multiple dimensions, and it's been exciting to study it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all turns out, but also to probing questions like that.
Joe, so much brain food for us to think about. So such a great pleasure talking with you. I feel quite honored. So thanks for your time, and thanks for joining us in our today's podcast.
Well, Philip and Ann, it's a pleasure talking to you, and I'll look forward to checking in the future. And if you come to visit, come to the banks of the River Charles here in Boston, come by and I'll show you around.
Wonderful. Well, I'll say thank you too, Joe. That was today's conversation with the mayor's husband, who's got Harvard in his blood and our future well set in his eye. Thank you so much. That was our conversation with Professor Dr. Joseph Fuller, Professor of Management Practice and co-head of Managing the Future of Work project at the Harvard Business School. And dear listeners, if you have a suggestion for us, for somebody who's absolutely as fascinating as Joe was today, then please just send us an email at podcast@i40.de, and with our hashtag Digikompetenz podcast, you can follow whatever happens in our podcast. Philip and I always like to say we do little somersaults when you're with us the next time, when we say again, stay digitally competent with Philip Ramin and Ann Coark.